Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Naka has just played rook c7 and Caruana continued with h3. Presumably so he can install a blockade with bishop e3 and blockade this d4 pawn and e4 pawn and not have to worry about knight g4. Although this h3 move is a little weakening. Black can't snap the pawn up straight away because the knight is hanging to the bishop. So Naka played bishop g7 to make this threat real, and Caruana defended the pawn with his queen g2, but this was slightly inaccurate. Better was first to kick the rook with bishop b6, and after rook c8 play king g2, and white keeps the balance of the position here. After queen g2, Naka played b5, correctly evaluating that it was now the right moment to play this move. And the idea is to undermine the support of the d5 pawn, which black has pressure against with his queen and his knight, and knight takes d5 will be possible. And the weakening of the c6 square is no longer significant because black is gaining enough activity to counter it, and the knight might even be misplaced on c6 to deal with the upcoming initiative. It's very much a turning of the tables. White had looked good with his queenside advance, and it was fine to play as long as he stayed in control. But Naka has managed to destabilize the position, and now the queenside advance proves to be a weakness as opposed to a strength. So a takes b5, a takes b5, and here Caruana played bishop takes f6, presumably so this knight, when it moves to c6, will be impossible for black to dislodge. And it also means that black will have to take excuse me, black will have to take on d5 with his queen in the event of c takes b5, which isn't quite as nice as being able to play knight takes d5. However, this exchange leaves black with a very powerful bishop on the long diagonal. Definitely stronger than the knight will be on c6. Also possible was c takes b5, knight takes d5, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, but this is not much better for white. Even after, for example, knight c6, now comes e3, and black is getting all the play here. The c6 knight is good, but the d5 knight is better. And these b pawns, although they're passed, are very sickly and will be easy to attack. And white will have a hard time holding out for a draw here. So Caruana's decision was practical. So bishop takes f6, and now he inserts g4 to get the queen away from the attack of d5, and in this manner white keeps the pawn, but he pays for it with weak squares. Naka played h takes g4, opening the h file, and after h takes g4 he played bishop d4 check, transferring the bishop to a very strong diagonal over here, the a7 g1, and vacating the f6 square so that the queen can use it. To king h2, now queen f6. So Caruana planted the knight in c6 now, and it should be noted too that if he plays c takes b5, as his previous play might indicate, kicking back the queen so this pawn can't drop and then taking here, white gets mated. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now, it's not too difficult. The answer is queen h4 check. Forces queen h3, and now of course rook c2 checks. Killer move. White has to give up material, for example rook e2, rook takes e2, and mate on the next move. If rook f2, then queen takes f2 and mate like this. Another possibility, instead of knight c6, You can see the queen and the rook are attacking e4 here together, but this is a bad blunder. Queen h4 check forces queen h3. Now queen takes h3, king takes h3, rook takes e4. Rook down for nothing. Okay, so knight c6 is the last move of the game, and this attacks the bishop, and Naka didn't want to give it up, and so he played bishop b6, keeping it on a very nice diagonal. And also playable was b takes c4 is winning. If knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and white has just lost against these two passed pawns. So bishop b6 anyway from Naka. And now g5 was Caruana's next move, gaining space and a tempo on the queen, but this was not a good move. The queen can simply go to f5, which is a strong and now also stable square. However, it's hard to find alternatives for white. For example, c takes b5 runs into rook a8, grabbing the open file, and from f6 the queen also eyes a1, so the rook can't be challenged here. And this is going to be a decisive penetration. Queen h3 is apparently best for white to defend. And the idea here that if king g7 planning rook h8, then white can play queen h6 check, and after king takes, then g5 check to try and get rid of the pressure. But now queen b2 check, king h1, and f5 with the threat of rook h7, and black is winning. So g5 was Caruana's move, so queen f5 from Naka, and here Caruana played c5. And what this does is temporarily blunts the bishop and undermines the d6 pawn, so that knight e5 can be played. It's a creative defense, but one that is unfortunately flawed. The engines preferred queen h3s, giving up c4 to get the queens off. B takes c4, queen takes f5, g takes f5. And you know, white is faced with a tough endgame here, but he can play on. So c5, d takes c5, so the pawn controlling e5 is gone, so knight e5 is possible. Naka plays c takes b4, unveiling the bishop once more, as well as winning a pawn and opening the c file. And now his position has become overwhelming. One of the ideas of knight e5 is to interfere with the defense of the e pawn, and Caruana continued with d6. We'll get to this pawn in a second. It's important to note that he shouldn't play rook c1 to challenge the c file, or simply rook takes c1, rook takes c1, queen takes f4 checks, winning a rook. So this means that black is in control of the c file tactically, and his position is very powerful now. So c takes b4, d6, and now comes rook c3, which is a very powerful penetration. And we can see that the knight being here is interfering with the defense of this pawn, and you know, white has pressure on it with his rook and his queen. Naka isn't concerned about this, so queen takes e4 isn't possible, or queen h3 is mate in conjunction with this rook. And Caruana played a rook takes e4, but this was a blunder. A better defense was knight g4 with more resources at hand, such as checks at h6 and f6. Although white is still busted, but it will take black longer to win. After Caruana's rook takes e4 came a brilliant game-ending move. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. King g7. What a brilliant game finisher. Rook h8 is now a monstrous threat, and correctly seeing no defense, Caruana resigned at this moment. Due to his last move, rook takes e4. The knight is now pinned, or the e4 rook is going to fall, and the queen is tied to defending the rook. Sorry, the white queen obviously is tied to defending the rook, and it's also tied to defending the h3 square, and the f1 rook has no useful moves. But more to the point, where is the king going after rook h8 check? And the answer, of course, is nowhere. Thus white is forced to give up material and eventually just get mated. The engine suggests rook f3, dropping a rook to queen takes e4, and you know, when this is your best defense, you're in trouble. The reality is that after rook h8 check, the only move is queen h3, and then comes simply queen takes h3, and it's mate. So it was a great attacking game from Nakamura, who showed patience and perseverance throughout a somewhat cramped opening, and clinical attacking skills when given the chance. We can have a quick replay with the threatened squares on, so we can see the game from start to finish, and we'll also see it from Nakamura's point of view. Where are we now? So the Sicilian defense, which, you know, since around the 60s and the 70s, due in no small part to Fischer and Kasparov, has become a hugely popular opening at all levels. Before that, in the old days, even as recently as Capablanca and even a few who came after him, the Sicilian was thought to be unsound. Capablanca famously said that it's an opening where black's game is full of holes, and it's interesting really, because he, even in his time, claimed that chess was being played out, and it'd be very interesting to see what he would have to say about the huge popularity of the Sicilian nowadays. And the reason it's popular is because it leads to so much imbalance. You know, e4, e5, d4, d5 is symmetrical and kind of attritional. With a Sicilian, right from the beginning, you're going for imbalance. You got white has the open d file, black has the open c file, and white gets a nice knight to d4, but black gets two center pawns, and with the opposite sides castling thrown in as well, it just leads to really, really interesting battles. And this wasn't really a classic Sicilian. The same themes are here, but to a lesser degree. But it still had great imbalance, of course, but it wasn't really played in the mainline Sicilian manner. But as you can see, it's a great imbalance at this stage anyway. And Naka's attacking capabilities were really brilliant. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.